1865. Oil is a chaotic business, dangerous, dirty, and so unstable in price that most serious investors keep their distance. 15 years later, one man controls 90% of all oil refining in the United States. This isn't a story about luck. It's the story of a man who understood something no one else did, and a company that would become so powerful, the United States government would have to legally destroy it. But the biggest paradox of this story doesn't happen until the government wins. When oil fever breaks out in Pennsylvania, thousands of men drop everything to drill, to dig, to search for the vein that will make them rich. A young bookkeeper from Cleveland, John D. Rockefeller, looks at all of this and sees something completely different. He has no interest in searching for oil. He wants to control what happens to it once it comes out of the ground. It's a decision that seems boring at the time, almost secondary. Drilling is a gamble. One well can make a man a millionaire, the next can ruin him. Refining is different. No matter who finds the oil, wherever they find it, every drop eventually has to pass through a refinery before it becomes useful for anything. Rockefeller has no interest in playing the lottery. He wants to be the gatekeeper every single player has to go through. In 1865, he buys out his partner and takes full control of a small refinery in Cleveland. From day one, he's obsessive about cutting costs. He literally counts the drops of solder needed to seal a can of kerosene and finds a way to use 39 instead of 40. Multiplied across millions of cans a year, that single drop saves the company a fortune. But Rockefeller's real advantage isn't in saving money on solder, it's something far more ruthless. In 1870, Rockefeller formally founds the Standard Oil Company. The name isn't an accident. Standard is meant to signal one thing to customers: quality they can trust, in an industry where contaminated kerosene kills thousands of people a year in lamp explosions. Within just 2 years, Standard Oil already controls more than 30% of America's refining capacity, still a minority of the market. Rockefeller has no interest in beating the competition. He intends to make it stop existing. Fall 1871. Rockefeller and America's railroads come up with a scheme so brazen that when it comes to light, it will trigger outrage across the entire country. They call it the South Improvement Company. On paper, it's an ordinary shipping arrangement. In reality, it's a secret deal. The railroads raise their official rates for shipping oil by 100% for everyone. But the companies allied with Rockefeller get half that increase back as a rebate. And that's not all. They also get an additional payment for every single barrel of oil shipped by their competitors, even oil that never belonged to Standard Oil in the first place. In other words, the more the competition sells, the more Rockefeller makes. He doesn't even have to lift a finger. The plan leaks to the press before it ever takes effect. Independent oil producers block shipments, organize boycotts, and in western Pennsylvania, it comes close to physical confrontation. Under public pressure, the railroads back out of the deal. Pennsylvania formally revokes the company's charter. The South Improvement Company disappears before completing a single transaction. But the damage is already done. The mere fear of what Rockefeller might do is enough. Over 6 weeks between February and March of 1872, Rockefeller buys out 22 of 26 competing refineries in Cleveland. Any independent owner who tries to hold out discovers there's nowhere left to borrow money. Rockefeller had already offered every major banker in the city a stake in Standard Oil, long before anyone needed the favor called in. Historians will later call it the Cleveland Massacre. This is only the first stop. Rockefeller carries the same playbook to Pittsburgh, to Philadelphia, to Baltimore, to New York. Every city, the same sequence: price pressure, secret railroad rebates, and finally, a buyout offer. The competitor can no longer refuse, because there's no one left to turn to for money. By 1878, Standard Oil controls 90% of all oil refining capacity in the United States. In 1882, Rockefeller goes a step further, merging all his companies into a new legal structure, the Standard Oil Trust. It's the first corporate trust of its kind in American history. A single board of trustees, controlling dozens of formerly separate companies operating across state lines, functioning as if they were one organism. This isn't a company anymore. It's a system whose only purpose is to make competition disappear. By the 1880s, Standard Oil stops being just an oil company. It becomes something America has never seen before, an organism so sprawling that even people working inside it don't fully understand its shape. Take oil transportation. When an independent company, Tidewater Pipeline, tries to build a competing pipeline, Standard Oil doesn't compete fairly. It buys up exclusive charters to build pipelines in every state Tidewater plans to cross, blocking the competitor before it can lay a single length of pipe. By 1879, Standard Oil controls nearly the entire new critical method of transporting oil in the country. Take politics. The company infiltrates Pennsylvania's legislature so thoroughly that journalist Henry Demarest Lloyd writes one sentence about it that will outlive the company itself. The Standard has done everything with the Pennsylvania legislature except refine it. Take the company's own structure. When investigators for the Hepburn Committee try, in 1879, to determine who actually controls America's oil industry, they uncover a network of seemingly independent companies secretly owned by Standard Oil. The president of one of them, asked directly, initially denies any connection, before being forced to admit he's also a director of Standard Oil itself. One critic of the era sums it up in a single striking number. Standard Oil produces only a 50th of America's oil, but dictates the price of all of it, and refines 9/10 of everything the country uses. This is no longer a question of whether Standard Oil has too much power over one industry. It's a question of whether any company in American history has ever held more power over the country as a whole, over its transportation, its politicians, its banks, its everyday life, without holding a single formal position in government. And eventually, the question stopped being whether Standard Oil was too powerful. The question became, was any government left powerful enough to stop it? No one expected the downfall of the most powerful company in America to begin with a woman from Pennsylvania who had spent most of her career writing about French culture. Ida Tarbell grew up in Pennsylvania's oil country. Her father was a small producer, one of thousands of independent businessmen ruined decades earlier by Standard Oil's tactics. When an editor at McClure's magazine asks her in 1901 to write a series on the company, Tarbell isn't starting from scratch. She's starting from a question she'd wanted answered since she was a child. Over the next 3 years, Tarbell builds something no one had ever attempted at this scale: an investigation grounded in congressional testimony, interviews with Standard Oil employees, and thousands of pages of court documents. One person who had tried to prove this invisible empire existed put it best: you could argue its existence from its effects, but you could not prove it. Tarbell does exactly that. Between November of 1902 and 1904, she publishes 19 installments in McClure's, piece by piece, exposing a mechanism that had stayed hidden for 3 decades: secret railroad rebates, the systematic destruction of competitors, a network of supposedly independent companies. The magazine's circulation explodes. The public, already weary of the growing gap between a handful of billionaires and everyone else, finally has proof, not just suspicion. A president who listens to that anger comes to power. Theodore Roosevelt, known as the Trust Buster, speaks openly about bad trusts crushing small business and exploiting consumers. In 1905, he orders a formal investigation into Standard Oil. A year later, the Department of Justice sues the company under the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, a law that had existed for 16 years but had never been used against an opponent of this size. By 1907, the federal government is running 7 separate cases against Standard Oil, arguing the company is 20 times larger than its closest competitor. For 40 years, Rockefeller had beaten every opponent he ever faced. Now, for the first time, his opponent isn't a person, it's a government. The case goes to the United States Supreme Court. On May 15, 1911, the United States Supreme Court issues a unanimous ruling. The justice reads words that will survive in law textbooks for the next century. The company was born out of the purpose to illegally acquire wealth and had destroyed the rights of its competitors. Standard Oil is declared an illegal monopoly. The court orders it dissolved within 6 months. It's the largest corporate breakup in American history. 34 separate companies emerged emerge from a single empire, each one now forced to compete independently, without central control, without secret rebates, without the hidden network of ties that journalists and investigators had spent decades uncovering. Among the new companies, Standard Oil of New Jersey, Standard Oil of New York, Standard Oil of California, Standard Oil of Indiana, Continental Oil Company, names the world will come to know under completely different signs decades later. Rockefeller, 72 years old at the time of the ruling, hears the news in the middle of a round of golf. He doesn't yell. He doesn't protest. According to witnesses, he simply looks at his playing partners and says one calm sentence: "Come on, gentlemen, let's get on with it." That reaction looks strange against the backdrop of everything that came before. A man who spent 40 years ruthlessly fighting for every point of market share has just lost his empire, and he acts like it's a minor inconvenience. America celebrates. The press declares the end of the Rockefeller era. The public, fed years of Tarbell's reporting and that of other investigative journalists, finally gets what it had been waiting for: proof that even the most powerful company on earth isn't above the law. No one yet knows why Rockefeller was so calm. Rockefeller was calm on that golf course because he already knew something no one else in America understood yet. At the moment of the ruling, he owns more than 25% of Standard Oil's stock. When the court orders the company split into 34 separate companies, Rockefeller, as majority shareholder, receives a proportional stake in every single one of them. He loses nothing. He gains a portfolio of 34 companies instead of one, and that's where the real paradox of this story begins. The market values the sum of those 34 companies higher than it had ever valued the single company before the breakup. Free of central bureaucracy, free of monopoly accusations hanging over every transaction, the individual companies start growing faster, more freely, each one competing for investors on its own. Stock values surge. Within a decade of the ruling, Rockefeller's fortune doesn't shrink, it grows fivefold. On September the 29th, 1916, 5 years after the federal government destroyed his empire, American newspapers announced something the world had never seen before. John D. Rockefeller becomes the first billionaire in human history. The breakup meant to punish him, made him richer than he had ever been as the owner of one single centralized giant. And the companies born from that breakup don't fade into history. They grow, change names, and today power the global economy under brands everyone knows. Standard Oil of New Jersey becomes Exxon. Standard Oil of New York becomes Mobil. Standard Oil of California becomes Chevron. Standard Oil of Indiana becomes Amoco. Continental Oil Company becomes Conoco. In 1999, two of those companies split apart a century earlier. Exxon and Mobil merge back together in the largest corporate merger in American history at the time. Two children of the same parent finding their way back to each other after nearly 100 years apart. Standard Oil disappeared from the map more than 100 years ago. The world it built didn't.